Hello everyone. We have these 20 interview questions regarding Appium, Expresso and XCUITest. They are mobile application automation softwares. What are the key differences between Appium, Expresso and XCUITest? Answer is Appium cross-platform, uses WebDriver protocol, supports native hybrid and web apps, slower execution. Expresso is Google's native UI testing framework for Android, faster execution, limited to Android, written in Java, Kotlin. XCUITest is Apple's native UI testing framework for iOS, faster execution, limited to iOS, written in Swift, Objective-C. When would you choose Appium over Expresso or XCUITest and vice versa? Choose Appium for cross-platform testing or when testing hybrid or web apps. Choose Expresso for fast, reliable, native Android UI testing. Choose XCUITest for fast, reliable, native iOS UI testing. How does Appium work and what are its architecture components? Appium uses the WebDriver protocol to communicate with mobile devices. Components: Appium server, WebDriver client libraries, vendor-provided UI automator 2, Android or XCUITest, iOS drivers. It has, as mentioned, slower execution compared to Expresso and XCUITest. Done with this, explain the concept of desired capabilities in Appium. Answer: desired capabilities are key value pairs that tell the Appium server how to start the automation session. For example, platform name, device name, app path. How do you identify mobile elements in Appium, Expresso, and XCUITest? Appium uses locators like ID, XPath, accessibility ID, class name, etc. Expresso uses view matchers, for example, with ID, with text, with content description. XCUITest uses locators like accessibility, identifier, label, value, etc. So we got to know that ID, XPath, accessibility ID, and class name are used just like Selenium. Expresso uses view matchers with ID, with text, with content description, etc. And XCUITest uses locators like accessibility, identifier, label, value, etc. How do you handle synchronization and weights in mobile automation? Appium implicit weights, explicit weights, WebDriver weight, fluent weights are used to handle synchronization and weights in mobile automation. In Appium, Expresso idling resources, view assertions, UI automator. This is the way of handling synchronization in Expresso. XCUITest explicit weights, predicates, XCT waiter. Explicit weights, XCUITest uses these things, predicates and XCT waiter. How do you run mobile tests in parallel? Answer is that while using Appium, use Appium Grid, just like Selenium Grid or cloud testing platform, for example, Sauce Labs browser stack. Expresso uses sharding or parallel test runners. XCUITest use parallel execution in Xcode. How do you handle mobile gestures like swipe, tap, and pinch zoom? Answer: in Appium, use touch actions or W3C actions. In Expresso, use view actions, for example, click, swipe. XCUITest use XCTouch objects. Okay, so this is the way to handle swipe, tap, and pinch zoom. How do you test native app features like camera access or notifications? In Appium, use device-specific commands or handle alerts. Okay, and in Expresso, XCUITest use native APIs or mock dependencies. How do you integrate mobile tests into a CI/CD pipeline? Use Jenkins, GitLab CI, or other CI/CD tools. Run tests on emulators, simulators, or real devices. Generate test reports and integrate them into the pipeline. This is how to integrate mobile tests into a CI/CD pipeline. How do you handle different screen sizes and resolutions in mobile testing? Use emulators, simulators with different screen configurations. Use cloud testing platforms with a wide range of devices. Write responsive UI tests that adapt to different screen sizes. How do you test mobile web apps using Appium? How can you test? So we go to this question again. How do you handle different screen size and resolution in mobile testing? Emulator simulators with different screen configuration, cloud testing platforms with a wide range of devices, like browser stack we are talking about, write responsive UI tests that adopt to different screen sizes. This is also how do you test mobile web apps using Appium? Set the browser name capability to Chrome, Android, or Safari iOS. Use WebDriver commands to interact with web elements. Okay, so this is about testing mobile web apps using Appium. Browser name capability to Chrome and this Android or Safari iOS. Use WebDriver commands to interact with web elements. What are the advantages and disadvantages of using real device versus emulators and simulators for testing? Real devices, more accurate representation of user experience, better performance testing. Emulators, simulators, faster setup, easier to manage, better for debugging. Real devices have a higher cost associated with them. Real devices, well, have a higher cost associated with them. Emulators and simulators, faster setup, easier to manage, better for debugging. Real device, more accurate representation of user experience, better. So these are the helping advantages and disadvantages as well. How do you handle dynamic content and asynchronous operations in mobile tests? Answer: use explicit waits or polling mechanisms. Use asynchronous testing patterns. Use idling resources. Well, dynamic content or asynchronous operations in mobile tests. Use explicit waits or polling mechanisms, asynchronous testing patterns, idling resources. How do you debug mobile test failures? Check test logs and error messages. How do you debug mobile test failures? Check test logs and error messages. Use debugging tools, for example, Xcode Debugger, Android Studio Debugger. Use device logs, for example, ADB, Logcat, Console app. Take screenshots or record videos of test runs. How do you test the performance of mobile apps? Use performance profiling tools, for example, Xcode Instruments, Android Profiler. Measure app launch time, memory usage, and CPU usage. Use network monitoring tools to analyze network traffic. How do you handle localization and internationalization testing in mobile apps? Change the device locale settings. Verify that UI elements and text are displayed correctly in different languages. Test date, time, and number formats. What are some common challenges in mobile automation testing? device fragmentation, network connectivity issues, handling dynamic content, maintaining test stability, keeping up with operating system updates. Well, these are some common challenges in mobile automation testing. How do you handle permissions and alerts in mobile automation? On says Appium, use alert handling methods or desired capabilities to grant permissions. Expresso, XCUITest, use native methods to handle system dialogues. Handle permissions and alerts in mobile automation. Alert handling methods or desired capabilities to grant permissions. Expresso's XCUITest use native methods to handle system dialogues. Okay, what are some best practices for writing, maintaining maintainable and reliable mobile tests? Use page object patterns. Write clear and concise test cases. Use data-driven testing. Keep tests independent. Implement retry mechanisms for flaky tests. Use descriptive locators. Thank you very much.